Commander Vexhai shifted uncomfortably in his seat as the recording device activated. The tribunal chamber was filled with representatives from 12 different species, all wanting to understand what made human warfare so different from everything they had known. His scarred exoskeleton clicked against the metal chair as he prepared to speak. The lead investigator, a tall crystalline named Judge Murthak, spoke in a voice that rang like chimes. Commander Vexhai, you have been called here to give testimony about human military tactics during the Kepler conflict. We need to understand why the Galactic Coalition received formal complaints about human methods of warfare. Vexhai's compound eyes focused on the tribunal panel. 3 years had passed since humanity joined the Coalition, but the memories of fighting alongside them still haunted his dreams. Where do I begin? He asked, his voice carrying a tremor that surprised even himself. Start with your first encounter, Judge Murthak suggested. Tell us about Kepler Station. Vexhai closed his eyes for a moment. Kepler Station was supposed to be a routine operation. The hegemony forces had surrounded a small human outpost with overwhelming numbers. Our intelligence said there were maybe 50 humans defending the station against 500 hegemony troops. By all military logic, it should have been over in hours. He paused, gathering his thoughts. We expected the humans to surrender quickly. That is what any civilized species would do when faced with 10-to-1 odds. Instead, we witnessed something that changed everything we thought we knew about warfare. The tribunal waited silently as Vexhai continued. The first sign that something was different came when the hegemony demanded surrender. The human commander, a woman named Captain Sarah Martinez, responded by saying, "Come and take it." Those 4 words should have been meaningless. Instead, they became a promise of horror. The humans had turned their entire station into a maze of death. Every corridor had been modified. Every room had become a trap. They used materials we had never seen weaponized before. Kitchen knives welded to pipes became spears. Cleaning chemicals became explosives. Medical equipment became torture devices. Judge Murthak leaned forward, but surely the hegemony's superior numbers eventually overwhelmed them. Vexhai's mandibles clicked nervously. That's what we thought would happen. But the humans fought like nothing we had ever seen. They didn't just defend positions, they turned defense into attack. When the hegemony breached the main corridor, they found it filled with a thick fog that burned their breathing organs. The humans had weaponized their own air recycling system. When hegemony troops tried to take the command center, they discovered that the humans had rigged their own computer systems to explode. But not right away. The explosions were timed to go off when the attackers felt safe. The psychological impact was devastating. Another tribunal member, a soft-spoken Aquarian, asked, "How did such a small force maintain morale against impossible odds?" Vexhai turned to face the Aquarian. That's what we couldn't understand. By the 3rd day of fighting, most species would have broken mentally. The humans seemed to get stronger. We intercepted their communications, they were singing. While under bombardment, while watching their friends die, while facing certain death, they were singing old songs from their homeworld. One song kept repeating. We had our translators work on it. The words were simple, "We shall overcome." They sang it while setting up explosives. They sang it while treating their wounded. They sang it while preparing to die. It made no logical sense. The chamber fell silent. Finally, Judge Murthak asked, "What was the outcome of the siege?" Vexhai's voice became barely a whisper. After 7 days, the hegemony withdrew. 500 troops had been reduced to less than 100. The humans had lost 32 of their 50 defenders, but they held the station. When coalition reinforcements arrived, we found the surviving humans calmly repairing their equipment and preparing for the next attack. Captain Martinez met us at the docking bay. Her uniform was torn. Her face was covered in burn scars and she had lost her left arm. When I asked her how they had accomplished the impossible, she simply said, "We did what needed to be done." Then she asked if we had brought coffee. A nervous laugh rippled through the tribunal chamber. "Coffee?" Judge Murthak asked. "Apparently, humans require a specific stimulant beverage to function properly," Vexhai explained. Even after a week of hell, her primary concern was whether her troops could get their morning coffee. It was the most human thing I had ever witnessed. But that was just the beginning, Vexhai continued. Kepler Station was where we first learned that humans don't follow the accepted rules of warfare. They make their own rules, and those rules are based on principles we didn't understand at the time. Judge Murthak consulted his notes. The formal complaints mention unconventional tactics that violate the spirit of civilized warfare. Can you elaborate? Vexhai stood up from his chair, his movements stiff from old injuries. Honored tribunal, the humans showed us that everything we thought we knew about warfare was wrong. We had rules about what was acceptable in battle. The humans had only one rule: win while keeping your honor intact. The difference between those two approaches is what you need to understand. Over the next several months, I witnessed tactics that defied every military manual in the galaxy. I saw humans turn their own bodies into weapons, their emotions into tools, and their apparent weaknesses into strengths. But I also saw something else, a moral code that ran deeper than any law or regulation. The tribunal members exchanged glances. This was not what they had expected to hear. Commander Vexhai, Judge Murthak said carefully, your testimony suggests that human warfare is both more brutal and more ethical than our existing frameworks. How is this possible? Vexhai looked directly at each tribunal member in turn. That is exactly what makes them so terrifying and so valuable as allies. Humans have learned to be monsters in service of their humanity. They will do terrible things to protect what they love, but they never forget what they're protecting or why it matters. The stories I'm about to tell you will challenge everything you believe about the nature of war, honor, and sacrifice. Some of what I witnessed was horrifying. Some of it was beautiful. All of it was unmistakably human. Judge Murthak activated his recording device. Please continue, Commander. The tribunal needs to understand what we're dealing with. Vexhai settled back into his chair, his compound eyes reflecting the chamber's lights. Very well. But understand this. Once you hear these stories, you will never think about humanity the same way again, and you will never sleep quite as peacefully, knowing that such capacity for both creation and destruction exists in the same species. The chamber fell completely silent as Vexhai prepared to continue his testimony. Outside the great windows, the twin suns of the Zephyrian homeworld were setting, casting long shadows across the tribunal hall. It seemed fitting that darkness was falling as they prepared to hear about the darkest aspects of human warfare. The first thing you need to understand about humans, Vexhai began, is that they view warfare not as a game with rules, but as a tool for protecting everything they hold sacred. This fundamental difference in perspective explains everything that follows. The siege of Broken Hope Colony changed everything we thought we knew about human determination, Vexhai continued, his voice taking on a darker tone. It was supposed to be a simple occupation. The colony had been cut off from supply lines for 3 months. Intelligence reports suggested the colonists were starving and would surrender immediately. Judge Murthak consulted his notes. According to coalition records, Broken Hope was a civilian settlement with minimal military presence. What made this engagement so significant? Vexhai's compound eyes darkened. That was our first mistake, thinking that human civilians were somehow less dangerous than their military. When coalition forces arrived at Broken Hope, we found a settlement of about 800 people, including families with children. We expected them to welcome liberation from their isolation. Instead, we found a fortress. Every building had been modified. Every street had become a killing ground. The humans had spent 3 months turning their home into the most elaborate trap in galactic history. The settlement's main street looked normal from above. When our advanced scouts entered on foot, they discovered that the humans had undermined the entire road. At the touch of a button, the street could collapse, dropping attackers into prepared kill zones below. But that was just the beginning. The Aquarian Tribunal member leaned forward. Surely the colonists couldn't have had enough weapons to arm an entire civilian population. Vexhai made a sound that might have been laughter but held no humor. Weapons. They turned everything into a weapon. Children's toys became explosives. Garden tools became spears. Kitchen equipment became chemical warfare devices. The humans had weaponized their entire way of life. I watched a 12-year-old human girl operating a sniper position from her bedroom window. She had been trained by her grandfather, an old soldier, to hit targets at 300 meters. When coalition forces tried to approach her building, she would fire a single shot and disappear through tunnels her family had dug in their basement. The elderly humans were perhaps the most terrifying. They had lived through enough hardship to understand the value of sacrifice. An 80-year-old woman named Mrs. Chen operated what the humans called the cookie trap. Judge Murthak looked confused. Cookie trap? Mrs. Chen would bake actual cookies using her remaining flour supplies. The smell would drift across coalition positions, reminding alien troops of home and comfort. When hungry soldiers approached her house, drawn by the familiar scent of baking, they would find an elderly human woman offering them food and kindness, except the cookies were poisoned. Not enough to kill quickly, but enough to incapacitate entire squads. Mrs. Chen would sit with the suffering soldiers, holding their hands and singing lullabies while they died. She genuinely cared for them, even as she killed them. A horrified silence fell over the tribunal chamber. Finally, Judge Murthak asked, "How could anyone reconcile such cruelty with genuine compassion?" "That's what makes humans so dangerous," Vexhai replied. "They don't see it as cruelty. They see it as protection." Mrs. Chen was protecting her grandchildren, her neighbors, her way of life. In her mind, she was being merciful by making the deaths as peaceful as possible. But the most disturbing discovery came on day 15 of the siege. Our intelligence teams found evidence that the colonists had been eating their own dead. The tribunal members recoiled visibly. "Cannibalism?" the Aquarian whispered. "At first we thought it was desperation," Vexhai continued. "Starving people driven to unthinkable acts. But when we captured some humans and questioned them, we learned the truth. They weren't eating the dead out of hunger. They were doing it strategically. The humans had calculated that every body they consumed meant one more day of fighting strength for the survivors. They held funeral ceremonies for their dead, honored them with words and songs, and then systematically processed the bodies to maintain their ability to resist. A human medic named Dr. Sarah Kim explained it to me during a brief ceasefire. She said, "The dead can't fight anymore, but they can still protect us. Every calorie we gain from them is another hour we can hold the line." She spoke about it the same way she would discuss any other medical procedure. What made it worse was the ritual aspect. They would gather the bodies in their community center, say prayers, share memories of the deceased, and then carefully prepare the remains. Children too young to fight would help with the processing, learning that even in death, humans could serve their community. Judge Murthak was struggling to maintain his composure. "How long did this siege continue?" 47 days, Vexhai replied. By the end, coalition forces were afraid to enter any building, approach any human, or trust any sign of surrender. The humans had turned psychological warfare into an art form. They would leave false messages in their tunnels, recordings of children laughing, families saying goodbye, elderly humans telling stories about better times. Coalition troops would find these recordings and break down emotionally, unable to reconcile the horror of the situation with the humanity of the voices. On day 32, the humans executed what they called the final gambit. They rigged their entire settlement with explosives and sent out a surrender message. When coalition representatives approached under a white flag, they were met by a group of human children carrying flowers and singing. The children led our delegation into the town square, where the remaining adult humans were waiting. Everything seemed peaceful, almost normal. Then the human leader, a school teacher named Miss Roberts, explained the situation. She told us that they were indeed surrendering, but on one condition. They wanted safe passage for their children to a neutral colony. If we agreed, they would hand over their settlement peacefully. If we refused, they would detonate the explosives and take as many coalition troops with them as possible. What made it truly terrifying was the calm way she presented the choice. She wasn't angry or desperate. She was simply stating facts. The children continued playing around us while she described exactly how many coalition soldiers would die if we chose violence over negotiation. The coalition commander accepted their terms. We evacuated the children to a neutral world, and the adult humans kept their word. They dismantled their traps, revealed their tunnel systems, and submitted to occupation. But they never stopped watching us with those calculating human eyes. 3 days after we took control of Broken Hope, every coalition soldier stationed there received a message. It was simple. "Thank you for keeping your word. The children are safe. We will remember this kindness. We will also remember if you break faith with us. Signed, the parents of Broken Hope." When we investigated, we found that the humans had never actually disarmed all their explosives. They had shown us the obvious ones and hidden the rest. The entire settlement could still be destroyed at any moment, but they chose not to do it because we had honored our agreement. The tribunal sat in stunned silence. Finally, the crystalline judge spoke. "Commander, You're describing a level of strategic thinking and moral complexity that seems almost impossible to achieve under such extreme circumstances. Vexhai nodded slowly. That's what makes humans so dangerous as enemies and so valuable as allies. They can plan for the worst while hoping for the best. They can be utterly ruthless in pursuit of their goals while maintaining strict moral boundaries. The children of Broken Hope grew up safely on their neutral world. Many of them later joined human military forces. When I met some of them years later, they remembered the siege not as a trauma, but as a lesson in how far their parents were willing to go to protect them. One of them, a young woman named Amy Chen, Mrs. Chen's granddaughter, told me that her grandmother's last words were instructions on how to make the poison cookies. Not as a weapon, but as a reminder that even the most innocent things could become tools of protection when family was threatened. Judge Merthok deactivated his recording device for a moment. Commander, I need to ask. After witnessing such tactics, how do you recommend the Coalition proceed with human integration? Vexhai considered the question carefully. Judge, the humans of Broken Hope taught me that there's a difference between cruelty and necessity. They did terrible things, yes, but they did them for good reasons with clear boundaries, and they never forgot their humanity in the process. I would rather have humans as allies than enemies. Their capacity for strategic thinking, combined with their unwavering protection of what they hold dear, makes them the most reliable partners in the galaxy. Just never ever threaten their children. The recording device reactivated as Judge Merthak prepared for the next portion of testimony. Very well, Commander. Please continue with your account of human warfare tactics. If the Siege of Broken Hope showed us human determination, the Rigel campaign revealed their mastery of psychological warfare, Vexhai continued, his voice becoming hollow. This is the part of my testimony that still gives me nightmares. Judge Merthok noticed the change in the commander's demeanor. Commander, if you need to take a break, no, Vexhai said firmly. The tribunal needs to understand what humans can do when they decide to break their enemies' minds instead of just their bodies. The Rigel campaign lasted 6 months, and by the end, Coalition forces were more afraid of human broadcasts than human bullets. It started with a discovery that human research teams had made about alien biology. They learned that different species had specific psychological and physical vulnerabilities that could be exploited without causing permanent damage. The Aquarian representative shifted uncomfortably. What kind of vulnerabilities? For my people, the Zephyrians, it was our sensitive hearing. Humans discovered that certain frequencies of human vocalizations could cause disorientation and nausea in our species. But instead of simply broadcasting these frequencies as weapons, they did something far more sophisticated. They recorded human children singing lullabies at those exact frequencies. The songs were beautiful, innocent, and completely devastating to Zephyrian troops. Imagine trying to fight while your enemy's children sing you to sleep with voices that make your inner ear feel like it's being torn apart. For the Saurian forces, who are cold-blooded, humans developed rapid temperature attacks. But they didn't just heat or cool the air. They alternated temperatures in patterns that mimicked Saurian mating displays. Enemy troops would find themselves responding to false biological signals in the middle of combat. The crystallines faced the worst treatment because humans discovered that certain light frequencies could induce false memories in crystalline neural networks. Humans would use portable lasers to make crystalline soldiers remember experiences that never happened, usually memories of their own troops betraying them. Judge Merthak's crystalline form flickered with distress. That would be considered a war crime under every galactic convention. But here's what made it truly terrifying, Vexhai continued. The humans were very careful to ensure that these effects were temporary. They weren't trying to cause permanent damage. They were trying to create specific emotional responses that would make continued fighting impossible. The most horrifying example was what they called the Ghost Fleet. Human forces had lost a major space battle, leaving dozens of destroyed ships floating in the asteroid belt. Any reasonable military would have salvaged what they could and written off the rest. Instead, the humans turned their own wreckage into psychological weapons. They filled the destroyed ships with automated systems that would broadcast on all frequencies when other vessels approached. But these weren't military transmissions. Coalition salvage crews would board what appeared to be dead human ships and suddenly hear recordings of human families saying goodbye to their loved ones before battle, children wishing their parents good luck. spouses promising to wait for each other, elderly humans giving blessings to their warrior grandchildren. Mixed in with these personal messages were tactical data that appeared to reveal human positions and weaknesses. Desperate enemy commanders would follow this intelligence, only to discover that every piece of tactical information led to carefully prepared kill zones. But the psychological impact was devastating. Imagine hearing a human child's voice saying, "Daddy, come home safe," and then using that information to locate and attack the child's father. Coalition troops began refusing salvage operations because they couldn't bear to hear those voices. The tribunal chamber was completely silent. Finally, the Aquarian asked, "How could they use their own family's emotions as weapons?" "That's what I didn't understand at first," Vexhai replied. "But when I spoke with a human intelligence officer named Captain James Morrison, he explained their logic. He said, every coalition soldier who refuses to fight because they've been reminded of the humanity of their enemies is a victory. Every enemy commander who hesitates because they're thinking about families instead of tactics is an advantage." Captain Morrison showed me recordings of coalition troops breaking down after encountering the Ghost Fleet broadcasts. He watched these videos with genuine sadness but also with satisfaction. He told me, "We're not trying to destroy their minds. We're trying to wake up their consciences." The most sophisticated psychological attack came when humans learned to synthesize alien pheromone patterns. Each species uses chemical signals to communicate emotions and intentions. Humans found ways to broadcast false pheromone messages that would trigger specific responses. For pack-oriented species like the Lupians, humans could broadcast abandonment pheromones that would make individual soldiers feel like their pack had deserted them. For hive-minded species like the Formicans, humans could transmit queen distress signals that would send entire battalions into protective frenzy. But the most disturbing was what they did to species with strong parental instincts. Humans would broadcast offspring and danger pheromones that would trigger overwhelming protective responses in enemy soldiers. Coalition troops would find themselves desperately searching for children who didn't exist, abandoning their military objectives to protect imaginary young. What made it worse was that humans seemed to understand exactly how each species would respond. They had studied our cultures, our biology, our psychology, and weaponized our own best instincts against us. Judge Merthak was struggling to process the information. "Commander, you're describing warfare that attacks the very foundations of what makes us civilized beings." "Yes and no," Vexhai replied. "The humans were using our civilized instincts against us, but they never attacked those instincts directly. They made us more aware of our own capacity for compassion, protection, and love. In a strange way, they were forcing us to be more true to ourselves. I remember one incident where a Zephyrian strike team had been exposed to recordings of human war orphans singing sad songs. The team commander, a hardened veteran named Krixtal, ordered a retreat because his troops were crying too hard to aim their weapons properly. When questioned later, Krixtal said, "How can we attack people whose children sing such beautiful songs about missing their dead parents? What kind of monsters would that make us?" The human psychological warfare had turned our own moral codes against our military objectives. The breaking point came when humans developed what they called empathy bombs. These were not explosive devices, but sophisticated broadcasting systems that would transmit the complete emotional experience of human soldiers during their final moments. Coalition forces would enter a combat zone and suddenly experience, firsthand, what it felt like to be a dying human saying goodbye to their family. The fear, the love, the determination, the sorrow, all of it transmitted directly into enemy minds through species-specific neural interfaces. The effect was devastating. Enemy soldiers would experience human death as if it were their own, understanding for the first time the full cost of warfare. Many coalition troops suffered complete psychological breakdown. Others simply refused to continue fighting. What made it truly horrifying was that the humans had recorded these experiences voluntarily. Human soldiers would record their final thoughts and emotions specifically to be used as psychological weapons. They were literally weaponizing their own deaths. I spoke with a human volunteer named Sergeant Lisa Park, who had recorded one of these empathy bombs before a suicide mission. She told me, "If my death can stop enemy soldiers from wanting to kill, then it serves a purpose beyond just protecting my squad. Maybe they'll go home to their families instead of dying for politicians they've never met." The Rigel campaign ended not with a decisive battle, but with mass surrenders. Coalition forces simply couldn't continue fighting an enemy that had turned warfare into an exercise in forced empathy. Humans had proven that the most effective weapon against a civilized society was its own capacity for civilization. The tribunal sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Finally, Judge Murthak asked, "Commander, how do you recommend we prepare for the possibility of conflict with humanity?" Vexai looked directly at each tribunal member. "Don't. If you find yourself in conflict with humans, surrender immediately and negotiate. They are the only species I've encountered that can make you grateful for defeat while teaching you something about your own capacity for goodness. But there's more to the story," he continued. "The psychological warfare was only part of what made humans so dangerous. What I witnessed at Titan Base showed me that humans could be even more terrifying when they chose to sacrifice everything for what they believed in." Vexahai's voice dropped to barely above a whisper as he prepared to describe the final battle of Titan Base. His compound eyes seemed to lose focus, as if he were seeing events from long ago. What happened at Titan Base still haunts every coalition officer who was there. It was the day we learned that humans could turn their own bodies into weapons. Judge Murthak noticed the commander's distress. "Commander, this testimony is clearly difficult for you. We can postpone if needed." "No," Vexhai said firmly. "The tribunal needs to understand what humans are capable of when they have nothing left to lose except their honor." Titan Base was where 200 human Marines faced 3,000 coalition troops in what should have been a routine mop-up operation. The base had been cut off from supply lines for 4 months. Intelligence reports indicated that the humans were down to their last ammunition reserves, their equipment was failing, and their food supplies were nearly exhausted. Military logic suggested they would surrender within hours of our arrival. Instead, we received a transmission from their commanding officer, Colonel Sarah Chen. She was standing in the base's main courtyard surrounded by her remaining troops. Her message was simple: "Titan Base stands. If you want it, come and take it from our cold, dead hands." What followed was the most horrific and inspiring display of human determination I have ever witnessed. The Marines had spent their final months preparing for this moment. They had turned their base into a monument to human sacrifice. The first wave of coalition forces expected standard defensive tactics. Instead, they encountered humans who had strapped explosives to their own bodies and charged directly into enemy formations. But these weren't desperate suicide attacks. They were precisely calculated tactical maneuvers. Each human suicide bomber carried just enough explosive to disable enemy equipment without causing massive casualties. They were trying to neutralize our tactical advantage, not maximize kills. Even in their final moments, they maintained rules of engagement. The Aquarian representative looked shocked. They were sacrificing themselves strategically? "More than that," Vexhai replied. Each Marine who volunteered for these missions left behind detailed tactical reports for their surviving comrades. They were studying the effectiveness of their own deaths and sharing that information to make subsequent sacrifices more efficient. I watched a young Marine named Private Jake Morrison record his final message before strapping on explosives. He said, "Tell Rodriguez that the blast radius is smaller than we calculated. Next guy should get 3 meters closer to the command vehicle." He was conducting a scientific experiment using his own death as data. But the most disturbing tactic was what they did with their wounded. In any civilized military, wounded soldiers are evacuated and treated. The humans of Titan Base turned their wounded into weapons. Marines who could no longer fight would volunteer to be used as bait. They would lie in areas where coalition troops were likely to advance, appearing to be helpless casualties in need of medical attention. When enemy medics approached to help them, the wounded Marines would detonate concealed explosives. Judge Murthak's crystalline form darkened with horror. "They weaponized our medical ethics?" "Yes, but here's what made it truly terrible. The wounded Marines genuinely thanked the enemy medics who tried to help them. They would apologize for what they were about to do, explain that they had no choice, and ask the medics to forgive them before triggering the explosives. A coalition medic named Healer Zixran was caught in one of these attacks. The wounded human, a sergeant named Maria Santos, held his hand and said, "I'm sorry, Healer. You tried to save me, and that makes you a good person. Please forgive me for what duty requires." Then she activated her explosives. Zixran survived the blast, but he was never the same. He kept saying, "She thanked me for trying to heal her, then killed us both." How can someone be so grateful and so ruthless at the same time? The contradiction broke his mind. By day 6 of the battle, coalition forces were afraid to help any wounded, even their own troops. The humans had turned our compassion into a liability. Medical teams began refusing to enter combat zones because they couldn't distinguish between genuine casualties and human traps. But the worst was yet to come. As coalition forces pushed deeper into the base, they discovered that the humans had rigged their own command center with enough explosives to level the entire facility. Colonel Chen sent out one final transmission. She stood in the main courtyard, surrounded by the bodies of her fallen Marines, and spoke directly to our commander. "General Korthek, you have fought bravely, and your troops have shown honor in battle. We respect you as worthy enemies. We also know that you have families waiting for you to return home. We are prepared to detonate this entire base and take your remaining forces with us. 3,000 coalition soldiers will die, and their families will mourn. This serves no purpose except pride. We offer you one final choice. Withdraw to a safe distance and we will surrender the base intact." General Korthek was furious. He demanded to know why the humans thought they could dictate terms when they were clearly defeated. Colonel Chen's response changed everything we thought we knew about human military philosophy. She said, "General, we are not defeated. We have accomplished our mission. We have held this position for 6 days against impossible odds. We have proven that human Marines cannot be easily broken. We have earned the right to die with dignity. More importantly, we have earned the right to offer you the chance to live with honor. Your soldiers are not our enemies. They are people following orders just like us. They have families who love them just like us. If you insist on taking this base by force, we will kill as many as we can before we die. But that would be a waste of good people on both sides." General Korthek was caught completely off guard. He was being offered mercy by people who had just spent a week turning themselves into weapons. Colonel Chen was treating surrender as a gift she was giving to him, not a defeat she was accepting. After an hour of deliberation, General Korthek agreed to the terms. Coalition forces withdrew to a safe perimeter, and the remaining 17 human Marines walked out of their base with full military honors. They had lost 183 people but considered the battle a victory. But here's what truly amazed us. As the humans surrendered, they provided coalition forces with detailed medical information about every trap, explosive device, and chemical hazard they had created. They spent their final free hours making sure that coalition troops could safely occupy the base without casualties. Colonel Chen personally guided coalition engineers through the base, pointing out every danger and explaining how to disarm each device safely. When asked why she was helping the people who had just defeated her, she said, "The war is over. Now we're all just people trying to get home safely." The most haunting moment came when we found the base's communication center. The humans had recorded final messages from every Marine who died in the battle. Not military reports, but personal messages to their families. They had spent their last ammunition creating a memorial for themselves. One message that stuck with me was from Private Morrison, the young man who had died conducting explosives experiments. He said, "Mom, Dad, I want you to know that I died doing something important. We didn't just hold a piece of ground, we proved that humans don't break, even when we're broken. I hope that means something." Coalition forces found themselves weeping while listening to these messages. These were the same humans who had been trying to kill them minutes earlier. But hearing their final words to their families made it impossible to see them as enemies. The tribunal chamber was completely silent. Finally, the Aquarian representative asked, "Commander, how do you reconcile such brutality with such humanity?" "That's the thing about humans," Vexhai replied. "They don't see it as a contradiction. They see brutality as a tool they use to protect their humanity. They become monsters temporarily so they can remain human permanently. Titan Base taught me that humans fight wars not to win, but to preserve something worth living for. They measure victory not by territory gained or enemies killed, but by whether they maintain their moral code under impossible circumstances. Every Marine who died at Titan Base could have chosen to kill more coalition troops. Instead, they chose to minimize casualties while maximizing the psychological impact of their sacrifice. They turned their deaths into lessons about the value of life. Judge Murthak activated his recording device for the final section. "Commander, You've described tactics that seem to violate every principle of civilized warfare, yet you speak of them with something approaching admiration. How should the tribunal interpret this? Vexhai stood up slowly, his scarred exoskeleton reflecting the chamber's lights. Judge, I watched humans do terrible things at Titan Base. I also watched them maintain their honor, protect their enemies from unnecessary harm, and treat death itself as an act of moral courage. They are the most dangerous and most ethical warriors I have ever encountered. If humanity ever threatens the Coalition, we should surrender immediately and hope they show us the same mercy they showed General Korthek. But if humanity ever offers us their friendship, we should accept it gratefully and never give them reason to doubt honored tribunal. Vexhai began his final testimony. After witnessing the horrors of human warfare, you might expect me to recommend caution or fear in our dealings with humanity. Instead, I am here to advocate for their immediate full membership in the Galactic Coalition, with one critical understanding. Judge Murthak looked puzzled. Commander, your previous testimony described tactics that seem to violate every principle of civilized warfare. How can you now recommend integration? Because, Vexhai replied, in all my observations of human warfare, I witnessed something that changes the entire context of their actions. For every horrifying tactic I described, I also witnessed an equal and opposite demonstration of human compassion. Let me share the other side of these stories, the part that shows why humans are not only dangerous enemies but the most trustworthy allies in the galaxy. During the Siege of Broken Hope, the same humans who poisoned Coalition troops also established secret medical stations where they treated enemy wounded. Mrs. Chen, who killed soldiers with her cookies, also spent her night sneaking medicine to Coalition prisoners who were suffering from local diseases. When I questioned her about this contradiction, she said, I kill soldiers who threaten my family. I heal people who are in pain. These are not contradictory actions, they are both expressions of my responsibility to protect life. The same moral code that made her deadly also made her merciful. At Titan Base, the Marines who turned themselves into weapons also created the most comprehensive enemy casualty care protocols I have ever seen. Every trap they set included detailed instructions for treating the specific injuries it would cause. They were planning to hurt their enemies efficiently and heal them effectively. Colonel Chen showed me a medical kit that every Marine carried alongside their explosives. She said, if we're going to harm someone, we have a responsibility to be prepared to help them survive that harm. Taking a life is sometimes necessary. Taking a life carelessly is always wrong. During the Rigel campaign, the same humans who weaponized our emotions also created support networks for Coalition troops who suffered psychological trauma. They established counseling programs, meditation centers, and communication systems that allowed enemy soldiers to contact their families during ceasefires. Captain Morrison, the human intelligence officer who designed the psychological warfare programs, also designed the recovery programs. When I asked him how he could create both the poison and the antidote, he said, every weapon should come with its own off switch. We hurt people to stop fighting, not to destroy them permanently. The most remarkable example came during a battle on Kepler Station. A human sniper named Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez had been targeting Coalition officers for 3 days, making precision shots that disabled rather than killed. On the 4th day, she noticed that one of her targets, a crystalline commander named Prismtel, was suffering from a degenerative condition that her shots had worsened. Sergeant Rodriguez did something unprecedented in military history. She ceased fire, crossed enemy lines under a flag of truce, and personally delivered specialized medical supplies that could treat Prismtel's condition. When challenged about risking her life for an enemy, she said, I hurt him to stop him from fighting. Now that he's stopped fighting, my duty is to help him heal. Prismtel later told me that the medicine Sergeant Rodriguez brought not only saved his life but restored his health beyond what it had been before the battle. She had risked everything to give an enemy something more valuable than what the war had taken from him. The Aquarian representative leaned forward. Commander, you're describing a species that seems to have codified mercy as rigorously as they have codified violence. Exactly, Vexhai confirmed. Humans don't see war and peace as opposites. They see them as different tools for achieving the same goal, protecting what they value. Their capacity for violence is matched by their capacity for healing, their ability to destroy by their compulsion to create. But the most important revelation came when I witnessed how humans treat prisoners of war. Coalition military doctrine suggests that prisoners should be housed safely and treated according to galactic conventions. Humans go far beyond these minimum requirements. I visited a human prisoner facility during the conflict. Coalition soldiers who had been captured expected basic survival conditions. Instead, they found a facility that was better equipped than many coalition military bases. Prisoners received not just medical care, but education, entertainment, counseling, and opportunities to learn new skills. The facility commander, Major Sarah Kim, explained the human philosophy. These people were fighting us because they believed their cause was just. The fact that we disagree doesn't make them evil. While they're here, we have an opportunity to show them that humans can be trusted with power over others. Prisoners were encouraged to maintain contact with their families, practice their religions, continue their education, and even receive treatment for medical conditions that predated their capture. Many coalition prisoners left human custody healthier and more educated than when they arrived. But what truly amazed me was the exit interview process. Every prisoner upon release was asked for feedback on their treatment and suggestions for improvement. The humans were using their enemies' experiences to become better at showing mercy. One released prisoner, a Saurian officer named Kesitar, told me, "I went into that facility hating humans and everything they represented. I left understanding that they are people who take their responsibilities seriously. They hurt me to stop me from hurting others, and then they healed me to prove that hurt was not their goal." This pattern repeated everywhere humans were involved in conflict. They would fight with terrifying efficiency and creativity, then transition immediately to equally impressive mercy and reconstruction efforts. They seemed to understand that winning a war meant nothing if you lost the peace that followed. Judge Murthak consulted his notes. "Commander, if humans maintain such strict ethical codes, why did coalition species file complaints about their warfare methods?" Vexhai's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Because humans make us uncomfortable with our own assumptions about the nature of conflict. We had created rules of warfare that were designed to make violence more civilized. Humans showed us that these rules were often more about making ourselves feel better than about actually reducing suffering. For example, coalition doctrine prohibits targeting civilian infrastructure. Humans argued that destroying a power plant quickly and efficiently, then immediately beginning repairs, caused less total civilian suffering than a prolonged siege that left civilians without food, water, or medical care for months. We complained about human psychological warfare because it made our troops cry. Humans pointed out that soldiers who were crying were soldiers who weren't dying. They had found ways to end conflicts by awakening empathy, rather than by inflicting casualties. The complaints weren't really about human cruelty. They were about human innovation. Humans had developed ways of fighting that were more effective and ultimately more humane than our traditional methods, but they achieved this by violating our assumptions about how civilized beings should behave. The final proof of human character came during the peace negotiations. Coalition leadership expected humans to demand territorial concessions, resource rights, or political advantages. Instead, they presented a document that had clearly been prepared before the conflict began. The document was titled Protocols for Post-Conflict Recovery and Galactic Integration. It was a comprehensive plan for rebuilding damaged infrastructure, treating war trauma in all species, establishing communication protocols to prevent future conflicts, and creating joint research programs to address the underlying issues that had caused the war. Ambassador Elena Vasquez, the human representative, explained, "We didn't fight this war to win something from you. We fought it to prove that we could be trusted with the responsibility of membership in the galactic community. Now we want to prove that we can be trusted with the responsibility of peace." The humans' peace proposal included provisions for war crimes tribunals that would apply equally to human and coalition forces, reparations programs that would benefit all affected civilians regardless of species, and educational exchanges designed to prevent future misunderstandings. Most remarkably, they included a detailed analysis of their own tactical innovations and recommended ways the coalition could defend against them in future conflicts. They were voluntarily giving up their military advantages in the interest of galactic stability. Judge Murthak set down his notes and looked directly at Vexhai. "Commander, your testimony presents humanity as simultaneously the most dangerous and most ethical species you've encountered. How do you recommend the tribunal proceed? Vexhai stood and faced the entire tribunal. Honored judges, humans have shown us that strength and compassion are not contradictory. They have proven that the capacity for controlled violence in service of protection is compatible with deep moral conviction. They fight like demons and heal like angels, often within the same hour.